Thanks for joining me this afternoon. We're here continuing our series on application modernization. And today's deep dive is really going to be around microservices. And it's a huge subject. So there's a lot of different ways we can go with this. So I got a couple of people with me today that are going to help us really dig a little bit deeper into pieces of it that are going to be helpful for your journey on the application modernization stack. And with us today, I've got Rich Kopakin and Eric Peebles, and they're going to help us talk about microservices. So guys, I'm going to kind of leave you with a really open-ended question here, but on the application modernization journey, what does microservices actually do for us?
Eric, you want to give it a shot? I'm punching right to you. That was like I had that lined up.
I was going to toss you the football first, man. I was going to do my best Tom Brady imitation.
That's because when I start talking on this, I'm going to go for like 10 minutes. One of you will have to rein me in, so that's why.
That's why I was going for you. But yeah, sure. No, microservices as companies are starting out their modernization journey, it's a great way to start to compartmentalize some of the approaches that they want to take on. And even start to prove out some of the concepts of modernization and looking at what they need to do to make it work. Keep it small, keep it focused, take baby steps.
So really, it's all about kind of peeling off little pieces to help them like focus efforts.
That's how I look at it. Yeah. So if you think of those big cables that hold up bridges, it's a bunch of threads wrapped around each other. So you got to start with one. You get that one all the way across, then you can start building others around it one at a time. So mentally, that's how I think about it.
I love that actually as a metaphor for it, because you're really building a bridge anyway, right? From the legacy into the modern application stack. So
there you go. That's it.
That's awesome, actually. So Rich, how about you? I mean, really, when we look at microservices, right? I mean, what are they? I guess is the question to you, right? How does that actually play?
Yeah. So what are they, ties in a lot to, how they help an organization at the end of the day. It's about isolation. It's about separation of concerns, which, regardless of, IT or not, we all understand that, hey, have one piece, one functional area, and that make it do its job really well. Know what it's supposed to do, know what it's not supposed to do, and how it interacts with other things, and you're able to manage it a whole lot better. You're able to, in terms of IT, scale it on its own, provide security on its own, regression test it on its own, and I think this is one of the things that, most companies have legacy applications or workloads in place already, and moving it to the cloud is where, once you isolate that workload, you get a really specific service designed for that type of workload, whether it's just a storage or archive or backup, or whether it's a running job. People just used to put everything on the same server, and hardware and memory, it was those three things. Now it's really about not only the hardware, but the functions that a lot of the clouds can provide you surrounding that particular function and service. So, anyway, once you, peel that on up there, whichever one you want to start with, that's a whole nother conversation how to do it. But, that's what it really provides the company is, there's going to be cost savings there. There's going to be efficiency savings there, speed, agility, all those things. And, free upgrades in a lot of cases as well. Once you have once you use certain services, people used to spend years updating Microsoft, SQL Server 2008 to 2012, or just Microsoft Server, 2002 to 2006, or whatever the numbers were at the time. Now, like, I put a database on the cloud, and I'm not responsible for the operating system. I'm not responsible for updating it. It's doing all that in the background. So anyway, I got a little bit more into cloud there than microservices. But again, like you said, Jeremy, the concept is, you could go so many different directions with it, right?
But the big thing that I think you're both touching on here is the idea of microservices is that literally what the name says, you can peel off a very small scoped portion of your application stack and have a purpose-built function or something that delivers consistently and at scale.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
100%. And the real problem is the first problem I think that everyone faces is how to break those apart, how to start, how to divide them. And there's so many different schools of thought on it as well. What's too small, what's too big, what
Right.
works for everyone's situation. But that is certainly will be the first hot topic of debate when you start proposing this architecture of where are those boundaries.
So really, if we're talking about like trying to figure out where to start and how to define success with microservices, then we really want to try to get into, so how do you right size these things? How do you decide what you're going to build on? But beyond that, there's some other stuff too, right? Like how do you deal with data services behind it all, and how do you secure it and manage it and operationalize these things from a legacy standpoint?
Yeah.
I'm gonna kind of go to that open question again to both of you, and whoever wants to take the first shot at this one. But define success for us, right? And how do you start, well, eating that elephant, or swallowing the ocean, as a lot of people say?
That is the important first step, is to get that defined. And it's also one of the hardest steps. It's like taking it can be like taking that step off of a plank where you can't see what the next step is, but you got to take that first step. But one of the keys is really making sure the business is on board. It's hard to justify microservices for just pure technical reasons. But once you start to tie some of the benefits and where you're going to start with the business team, and you agree on a starting point, and you define that steel thread becomes something that touches enough of a business process, but doesn't become a full-blown business application, then you typically find some areas of agreement where you can right size it, you can get the right level of backing and support, and then you can start to show some benefits in this process. And now look how much faster it works. Look how more quickly we can change it. Look how much easier it is to quantify the cost and to understand the scope. And it starts to allow that business team to think about what they can do without having to think about this entirely big application. They're focused on, I can do this thing, and I've got this team, and they can go and do it. So it's like, I was working with a client once, and they said, it's like you guys have a magic wand. Now my department has a magic wand, and you just wave it and whatever I want shows up. I mean, that definitely wasn't the case, but that's how they felt.
But that's exactly what happens when you find that sweet spot like that. Right? And that's what you're kind
Exactly.
of talking about, is that one little function, and you scale it out and scope it out just right, and it becomes that magic wand that IT can run for any part of the business going
Right.
forward.
Yep.
Right. Exactly.
It actually made me think of how I've grown a little bit as a developer, consultant, technologist, because, in my first, let's say 1 to 5 years, when, there was an upgrade, a technical enhancement that I wanted to make. Oh, you have this project? Well, I'm just going to slip it in on the back end here and not tell you about that. That's just part of this. Don't worry about that. But I think as I've grown, your point is certainly the right way to do it is to get the business on board. And I look at, two different sides of the business is when you think about who they are. I mean, there's literally IT leadership can be thought of the business itself, because they're responsible, for maintaining the systems. They need to not go down. They need to make sure that they're getting, the requirements throughput, the functionality built very fast. They need to, not have any major hiccups, or else it's going to be someone's ass on the line. But then obviously there's the business side as well that is asking for their specific, workflow, or product tracking, or sales machine, or rules engine, or whatever the hell they're asking for. Actually giving them a chance to take an old system and say, hey, we're going to revitalize this. We're going to, think about this again. Now that we've had something established for a while, now the ins and outs of it and what it's supposed to do and can't do. Again, I go back to, you probably have a lot of things in place that need modernization. So, giving it that, at minimum, they get a facelift. At most, now you get a lot of whole new cool features and services that just weren't possible before, because you didn't have that magic wand behind the, once you get on cloud and you get on, you break things out and distribute things properly, it really provides you with some great tools out of the box to be able to handle each one individually.
And that's really what microservices are, right? They're another tool in the tool belt for everybody to use. And
Exactly.
we talk about it as the magic wand right now, but it's really just one of those other tools that we can pull out when there's a specific business function that we can peel off and become really efficient at running that independently. And that's one of the, I think, the things that you're touching on there, Rich, as you're kind of talking about getting that agility going. We're talking a lot about, agility and, speed and all that kind of stuff, but can you give me a kind of a story from one of your experiences, at least, that where we've really helped the business move forward?
So with business teams, oftentimes an application has so many stakeholders, especially in the larger companies that span different countries. So you've got stakeholders and app for different parts of the application. So years ago, we worked on an HR application, and everyone is hiring people for this multinational firm, and they all have their specific way and their process of how to do it. But trying to coordinate an application to meet the requirements for 10 stakeholders across multiple time zones, nations, and then build that and go through user acceptance testing for all those different groups is nearly impossible. So if we we developed the we'll call it a proposal to say, let us start to build services, minor, small services to support each of your independent processes. And then once we get them all working, then we can put those processes together in one large application and orchestrate it for all your needs across the board. But that allowed each individual unit to focus on what does it take to hire somebody for us? Because everyone has different rules, different regulations, different laws, different practices, different how it was just different everything. So starting small and just focusing on building a core set of services. And in this case, we sort of pulled off a core set of services in this monolith application that was built, and started to focus just on their processes. But what the business team learned is that as they were working with this and going through this process, that, oh, we can start to adjust our process because you know what? It's constantly changing. This year, we're going out to hire college recruits, and in 6 months, these college kids, they want something totally different. So we got to adjust. And then we're not hiring when we're not hiring college kids and we're going for senior consultants, they want something that's totally different, or maybe we need a contractor. So all the different needs, and they were always needing to change. So the agility was essentially driven by the business team, and they pushed that into the development team and required us to be more agile just to meet their needs.
And that's an awesome story. You hit like two great points there for me. The first one, right, is the idea of using microservices to peel off a whole mess of disparate process, and then the ability to take that later on in the journey and start combining them back together after you've got the working process and that you've got user acceptance testing from disparate groups. You can start combining, consolidating later on down the road, right? And that's huge for the app modernization journey, because
yes,
how do you get from point A to point Z? Well, there you go. That is one of your first steps, the easy button to say, hey, we can get you quick success, right? And somebody can start seeing something that's tangible and achievable.
exactly. Yes. Yeah. I think that's a key phrase that you said is, people see something that's tangible, because oftentimes as tech guys, we see it, but it's conceptual to everyone else.
Right.
So yeah, having something they can touch and see and look at that's working, it's a huge win for the tech side of the house to present to the business side.
Yeah, and then the second point, that flexibility, right, that you bring in with this, by being able to kind of like split things off and then being able to customize for each different department or organization within a company. I mean, it's kind of the nirvana that most large organizations are looking for, right? They want to have the ultimate flexibility at zero cost, and they want to deliver yesterday.
Yeah.
We can't quite get to yesterday, but we can get close to tomorrow.
Exactly. Exactly.
I love that perspective too. Of that, while you were talking, Eric, it makes me think of the best way to look at this, honestly, is, or in my mind, horizontal and vertical. And what you were mentioning is more of that vertical look around, features and functionality in these individual applications that are monoliths that people, keep adding on. Let's add a checkbox and let's add another dropdown, and you have checkboxes and dropdowns all over that aren't being used, and status windows and workflows that aren't doing anything. And it becomes just a megalithic mess, out there. And really stepping back and like from a vertical slice down. And the really cool thing that when you do one of those, you have to generally, depending on the complexity of that piece, start building out those horizontal pieces as you go along, and you build out those patterns for your next vertical piece and your next vertical piece and your next vertical piece. So really, they just continue to get easier as you build them out because you continue to add a little bit more horizontals. I mean, obviously, you talk 3-tier architecture, let's go minimum with that. You have your database, you have your web page, static content, whatever. And then after that, you have a service layer in the middle. Now that service layer is where microservices gets its name, because you, even for a single application, you could start breaking those out and those get individual workloads. But the easiest way to break them out is, in terms of the horizontal, is just by workload type. Is it a Redis cache? Is it a job that's running by itself? Is it a messaging queue? Is it, what does it do? That's an individual piece. But then after that, that has less to do about what functionality vertical it's providing. But once you build out that component, now you could it's very easy to either duplicate it or reuse the same component based on your vertical stack. So, from a business standpoint, there's no way to look at it other than those verticals, because they're interested in the top level. What can you do for me? What can you do for me?
Yeah.
But I think as an organization, it just allows you really, to focus on your problems and understand what the problems really are, instead of just add one more bit to this, gigantic application already, and now all our problems are going to be solved, except 3 months later, someone else is going to be like, well, just add this little bit more. And that goes on for 20 years. And I'm sure most people are familiar with those applications. I feel like, whether from an end user perspective or from a technical perspective, which underneath you're seeing the tip of the iceberg there, and the tip of the iceberg is already really ugly. So,
I mean, but you're hitting it right. That business view, that vertical, right? And from the IT view, it's really just a development pattern. If we can find a way to constantly repeat something that we've already done, it makes it so that IT can deliver so much faster. But if we can do that in a way that still translates to that business vertical need and to that business process, we become the heroes rather than the guys that are just holding things up.
Yeah, that's it.
And those individual services, hey, I want to build this new vertical application. Guess what? I got the rest of the iceberg built out below here, and it's perfect foundation, and it's carved out, and we just need to add a little, snowman on the top.
It's that idea. You want to deliver a document to our users. Well, that's great. You know what? All I need is that static web page and something to serve it up. And we've got a pattern because we just developed that for this other group, but they were delivering a web page instead of a document. So we're just going to replace this one little piece now. And instead of having to rebuild or just add it onto that other application, it becomes its own independent thing.
Yep.
Exactly.
And it's got its own security. You test it independently. So regression there, if you change it, boom, it becomes a lot easier. Your contracts become very well defined when you do this. And those contracts, knowing what the segregation of duties and responsibilities are, it really, gives you ultimate power over that piece. And combine that with, again, I go back to the cloud, because that's what these companies have done. Like, Amazon, they've made these little pieces so that when you use their services to deploy your, workload in their container, their structure, they've included around there about 10 or 20 useful things, that they know you want to do right out of the gate with that service. And they've made it like seamless to you, where again, probably even too easy in a lot of cases, but they've been there before. We've, after a number of years of experience in developing applications, you just know what people are going to ask for in these areas, and what you're going to need to build beforehand. So they know all the bells and whistles, and they just make them easier for you to do. So, and they continue to develop them. They come out with 10 new features on any, come out with 5 new services and like 10 new features a week, I feel like. And that's why nobody can remember all the acronyms. Just throw out the 3 letters and you're probably going to hit on one. But no, I mean, that's where me and Jeremy spend most of our time, probably, is just memorizing those acronyms so that we know to say them. But no, I mean,
you guys are ahead of me.
So the easy part you got, Rich, though, is that you're usually focused on one cloud. I've got 3.
I'm getting there. Trust me.
I know. I'm working on getting everybody up to that speed, so that's okay.
Yeah.
But I want to touch on one thing that you hit in there, Rich, and that was contracts, right? And when we talk about microservices, one of the biggest, I'd say, boundaries for entry or limits that organizations tend to hit their heads on is the service dependencies, right? When you start running microservices, you run into a potential of running into what they call, the old spaghetti code. The idea that there's just spaghetti of service dependency requirements that, we have to work with 9 different other projects now just to make one change in our API. So how do you normally address that? And what's some of the approaches that you can do to really keep control of your project as you start moving into this microservices architecture?
That DevOps, I'm not sure how much client name we can, but the one that you've been on for a while, Eric, where we basically provided that we are their DevOps department and continue to be, I think, is a great example of what they how they're able to break these things in a good way, and also provide a system and automation that makes it easy for them to know what those points are and to easily modify them in one or 2 places, and then you're good. But you went through the experience of doing that, so tell me.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of crying is typically involved. A little bit of begging. But automation configuration, right? The more we can automate, and especially as some of those changes are being made, or some of those decisions, or how to keep things separated, the more you can automate some of those and take it out of the developer's hands, so they just focus on the code, checking their code into a repo, and then it gets deployed off to the service, the better for the organization. And the more you can manage that from a portfolio perspective, as opposed to an individual service or even an individual project perspective. So yeah, in that situation, Rich, we're working to automate those configurations, automate those services, and we do that through a lot of the great tools that we've talked about that cloud providers provide, to deploy that, and then making sure that we allow them to, for some of these standard services that are typically the same, provide a set of parameters to just as inputs to those services, as opposed to then having to go in and change the code.
Yeah.
So combination of those 2 things typically helps to keep some level of organization and management. Nothing's perfect. There's always the unexpected events that happen, but in that model, and it allows us to manage some of those unexpected events. But it is an organizational shift. It's definitely one that the organization has to buy into.
It actually brings the problem to the organization. The problem exists either way. When you're in a monolith application, you have your services in the background, and that's where you get real spaghetti code. That's where it really is. Now, the thing is that spaghetti code has been limited to make it one guy's problem. And if that guy leaves, good luck finding another person to read his 80,000 lines of spaghetti code that he had memorized and know what's going on. Microservices, they provide you those guardrails for that not to happen. And again, really force you to isolate, which sometimes does include a little bit more process around that, which is why, to be fair, in for certain projects, for certain companies, for certain, situations, microservices is not the be all end all key.
Right.
It allows a smaller application. Not having them, honestly, will allow a smaller application to be a bit more agile, or at least separate them by, workload types, but you don't have to worry about carving out those verticals. You just have one vertical,
Yes.
so, don't use the cannon when you don't need, when you don't need it. But for a large organization who has this web of stuff going on anyway, no matter what, it brings that web of stuff to the surface level that everyone could have eyes on it, see it, understand the problem, and then, solve it in a way. Just like you said, at the highest level, people start really looking at these problems the right way, and, what tools they have in their chest to solve it, or what new tools they could build, instead of, let's just have the Swiss Army knife that has 50 billion things sticking out of it,
And that goes back to the
yeah.
analogy I gave earlier, right? This is a tool in the tool belt. It's not the only tool, but the idea here is that we got to find the right tools and not have the Swiss Army knife where we have a million of them, but have
Right.
that select list of tools that we can apply at the right place with the right leverage to get the
Yes.
results you're really looking for.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's one tool in the toolbox for sure.
If a company was going to start this process, and we kind of hit some of these points earlier on already, right?
Mhm.
The big thing here is get business buy-in and find that small business function we can slip off. But if we were going to try to lay this out in, let's call it 5 points or 5 steps, what would those 5 steps look like to you guys?
I think the first is got to be really going back to defining what those verticals are, defining those domains, what's the separation of responsibilities, and that needs to be done really both at a technical and business level, and more business, honestly, than anything else. You really have to understand, what your core functionality is, and how to break that out and separate it. There's and I found myself with that problem honestly a few years ago, and I realized, like, I talk about this stuff all the time. I should be able to do this easily, but I really wanted to, like, fall back on some, like, standard method of doing this, and I was like, I don't know exactly what I'm doing here. So did a little research, and it turns out people have solved this problem in the past. One of the really promoted patterns is called the bounded context pattern, or context mapping. Microsoft has a lot of documentation on it. I mean, there's books written about it, but it's, in terms of the subject of how and what those boundaries are, you don't, sure, there's going to be obvious business ways, sometimes even political, on how to, break things up, and not that those reasons are even bad in any way. You have to keep those where you want, but that's a long-winded answer to define the verticals.
And it's actually, I think the first 2 steps is what you're saying, right? So define the business vertical and the business objective, and then translate that to the technology. So get that alignment between the two.
Yeah. And definitely set that success criteria. Understand, when I was in college, first question I'd ask, first day of every class, what do I need to do to get an A? I'm not going to do more than what I need to do to get an A, and I don't want to do less, but, help me understand what are the requirements to get an A. And it's the same thing here. Agree on what success means for this journey as you start, get everybody to buy in. And then, start looking at some of those key 2 points that Rich just outlined as those steps to progress towards meeting those requirements to reach a successful conclusion.
Which goes to the third step then, pretty naturally, right? What you just said. I mean, in a way, you want to, you need to know where you're currently at really well, and you need to know where you want to go really well. And I think we all know where this is going. What that third thing is that, we need here is that roadmap, and, prioritizing it. Well, first, knowing what you have to do and then prioritizing it is, the next key in there. And there's a lot of nuance to building that. And this is where This has become one of my favorite pieces now as I've grown in my career. It used to be how to structure lines of code and classes and objects. Now it's how to structure these larger, cloud components together. And it's interesting to me. I mean, I'll probably pat myself on the back a little bit, but sure. Anyone with Visio who knows the icons can kind of define a path to A to B and how to get there. You could do it, but it's really understanding for each step along the way of what is the best way to get there, I guess.
Defining right, I think is where you're going, right? Is making sure that in order to really get from point A to point Z and find that right priority and the balance of, the business need to the technology need, it's really a balancing act of finding that right path that's going to take you to success, like you were trying to define, without, realistically, overcommitting and trying to do too much to get that A, or falling short at the end, right? And this is an old DevOps standard, right? And we love DevOps here at PrimeTSR, right? But when it comes down to it, it's defining success is literally half of our battle typically when we set up requirements gathering, because understanding where somebody wants to go and how they want to get there is like, I love these conversations that I've had with everybody, and I've had quite a few of them over the last few days. But as I've been doing these step collecting, and we say, how do you get there and how do you want to start? Not once has anybody come out and said, go get this technology, figure out this coding language, and try to apply these steps. It has truly been a consolidated view of, you know what, go talk to the business. Let's figure out what they want to, where they want to go. Translate that to this technology, and let's see if we can align it to a way that's been done before so that we don't have to build this wheel again. Let's define success, make sure that we know what our outcomes are going to be, and then finally just find that path, tread the path that's already been run, and start running down the path and with all the needs that we have, and support it as much as we can through the business cycle.
Your point about PrimeTSR, what we do really well there is those non-functional requirements, that term that we should get a sign or a poster or something like that, or carved in wood, something in stone. But defining those business features, what the business wants, great. But asking those questions about, what's the workload here? What's the performance here? What's the backup here? What's the cost here? And that defines what you're building. Is it bigger than a bread box? Is it, and the specific technology, you should be using for that situation and how to dice it up. There's a lot of different, tools that do the same things out there. There's a lot of different factors for picking one, but you need to know what you want before you pick one. And, it goes back again, really to the beginning about defining it, but that's one thing that has been drilled into my head since working here and always work here. We will ask those questions and we will document, the plan, and we will document, the answers, and we will put that up, and everybody's going to have a shot at it, and you need to defend it like a thesis, and then it's approved, it's signed off. And if, this is more, there's a CYA aspect of if somebody comes back later, sure, you point to the thing, but it's really about, it should put it up for everybody to, because you may have not gotten it right. It's deceptively hard and deceptively simple at the same time. It's especially with the wealth of services that just continue to come out every day, and technology, it's just exponentially, geometrically growing. It's insane. Yeah,
definitely.
And then build it.
Well, the final step, right? Let's build it.
Go execute.
Figure it all out. Figure out how we're going to get there, and then you put the right team behind it to create it, right? And to keep the team on that path. I mean, that's the other side too, is right. Don't let people get cowboyish and go off and try to pioneer something if we can keep them on a path that we know is going to get them to success.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Now it's open thought, guys. Anything you want to keep on going on? Anything else we want to try to share?
I guess use cases. The only thing I'm thinking, even your guys' thoughts of when to do it and when not. I mean, it's obviously a certain. There's a critical mass, essentially. Product shops, especially if you're that startup building from scratch, if you plan to have your application take off in any way, shape, or form, it really is going to pay for that to put that investment up front. It shows how well you're committed doing that.
Just that, but SaaS applications, right? So if you can start breaking out those verticals, it makes it easier for multi-tenancy. You're going to have a more flexible application stack.
Yeah. I mean, that's your core business. That should be built as good as, as good as any piece of software that can be built. If you're putting that SaaS out there, you better have done this the right way in the back end. The businesses maybe, as they grow could get, a little bit sloppier with, I'm going to pull in and out this technology, this component, this, that, the other. It's an evolution, there, but certainly breaking down and how you define your verticals and what they are. But certainly if you're that SaaS shop, you better get that right, or else you're going to cause yourself a world of pain.
Agreed.
And then after that, there's the application that's going to be used by 50 users, and it's a custom workflow process that, sure, a bigger organization or want something custom built has to find, but you realize what it is and what it isn't, and maybe just there's some kind of monolithic thing there, again, that single vertical, let's call it, that that service layer maybe isn't 5 different things broken out, it's still one thing, but at least your microservices are still that 3 tiers, minimum there,
Microservices isn't for everybody. I think that's what we're really saying, right? There's a right use case for it, and there's a wrong one. And I think we hit it pretty well earlier too, just saying that it's another tool, right? There's containerization, there's microservices, there's 3-tier, there's monolith. None of these are wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
It's more finding the right fit for the business use case that you have.
Yeah, that's it exactly.
Absolutely.